Great. So we have Taras with us from SunnySide Digital. Hopefully I have that right, Taras. Glad to
Yep,
have
you're
you on
good.
this show. Uh, we've connected a while back and a few times, and I see you're doing your thing right now with SunnySide and supplying the market with proper inventory and making sure everyone's locked and loaded for tough times ahead. I've
Yep.
been following some of your posts and your work on LinkedIn and other platforms. I'd love to dig deep into some of your insights. I find them really interesting with regards to what's happening in the compute space in general, and really we'll focus mainly on Bitcoin mining and verticals of that. But before we get started, I'd love for you to give us a brief introduction about yourself and your journey into Bitcoin and how you got to establish SunnySide and what it's all about.
So appreciate that. Thanks for the invitation to be on the podcast. Yeah, so I started off as a banker wanker. Graduated grad school in 2015 with a law degree and MBA, and didn't want to be a lawyer. Decided to be an investment banker because in 2015 I graduated with a negative $200,000 in net assets to my name. So I worked in capital markets on the investment banking side first at BMO in metals and mining, and then second at TD Securities in technology, media, and telecommunications, which actually was quite helpful for what I've been doing now. Left investment banking after 3.5 years just because I candidly got a bit bored with the model of what bankers do as to like, here's your 15 product offerings, go and hit the market scrub. So I went in-house to a early stage tech company in Toronto called Decentral, which had one of the first widely used hot wallets called Jax. Worked with them for a while, and then I was recruited to go to Antigua by a private family office. And they had set up a subsidiary that had about $200 million allocated to digital mining and data center deployment. And so I came on as VP Corp Dev, and within a few months was promoted to CEO, and we basically took the next, call it, year and a half, 2 years to build up what was at the time the largest privately controlled digital mining fleet. We were in 7 countries with 21 individuals working under the payroll with 330,000 ASICs. So I'd been to Inner Mongolia, Urumqi, Kazakhstan, Georgia,
Wow.
all around like Northern Europe, Scandinavia region, Canada, and United States. Just finding hosting partners, negotiating with manufacturers. At one point, we were the largest purchaser of Bitmain hardware at the time, and then moved to Canaan after a big hash war that we were part of. And then eventually got picked up after I left the family office ecosystem by Core Scientific. And then I spent 2 years, over 2 years at Core Scientific, helping build up their revenue. We did $2.3 billion in total contract value over the 2.5 years that I was there, working directly with the founders and the operating team. And then I subsequently resigned to join a Canadian power company because I wanted to be more involved in the intersection of power generation and data center off-taking as the off-taker first resort. I was at Validus Power for about 10 months, which was a great opportunity at the time when I first joined, and then turned out not to be the best opportunity, but actually a very interesting learning experience for me that will certainly help me navigate the future quite nicely, having dealt with many sharks in sheep's clothing. So after I left Validus, I decided to go out on my own. I had been doing wholesale hardware brokerage work as a side hustle for numerous friends and colleagues in the ecosystem on a quiet, discrete basis. And once I left Validus, I decided to take SunnySide Digital as my full time, and I've been doing it since. We're at 15 partners in the company, and then over 30 referral agents globally. We've done over 400 million in top line revenue over the past 12 months, if not more. Have sent hardware, either ASICs, transformers, PDUs, PSUs, parts to virtually every continent except for Antarctica. But I know there's a Ukrainian research facility in Antarctica, and I'm going to try to get them a GPU so I can say I've transacted on every continent. But it's been a wild ride. I mean, we were building during the bear market. We worked with a lot of the pubcos that were struggling for a bit, helping them with asset to working capital conversion, meaning selling assets to get cash to pay down creditors. I know we've gotten some really nice Christmas gifts from our partners saying thank you very much. We've stepped up when nobody else could help them, and we helped solve a lot of issues. And honestly, at the end of the day, that's what wakes me up in the morning. Is I like helping solve problems. And when my large partners ask me, what do I want to do? And I say, I just want to make sure that if there's a problem that you guys have, you can have one phone number to call, and my team will be able to solve it for you.
It's
So that's
amazing.
kind of what SunnySide Digital does.
I love it.
We're a great team. Some of the public companies that have given us public testimonials are Iris, Clean Spark, Bitfarms, and Cathedra, who actually just had a fantastic transformational deal through a reverse type of takeover. Although Drew and Anthony stayed on as the senior level executives. So great to see our clients actually continue to evolve and grow, especially as we're getting into this beginning of a bull market. It's crazy times.
I love the energy, Taras, and I love what you're doing. I mean, ultimately, you're providing like asset management for these compute infrastructure companies, helping them manage those assets in times where they need either to sell, offload, upgrade their fleets, all that stuff, and making sure these companies are doing the right thing when it comes to asset valuations, right?
Exactly.
That's
Our work
yeah,
isn't sexy. We're
yeah,
chopping
yeah,
wood,
yeah, exactly.
right?
And
Like,
that's your finance expertise bring coming to surface in this business, which is great. And you
yeah,
said 400 million in the last 12 months working with pubcos. That's really interesting, from an entrepreneurial point of view, when someone's trying to venture into this industry and into the sector, and they see someone like yourself who's been there, done that, and taken a company from zero to one, and getting those impressive top lines, and working with such large corporations. What do you feel was the biggest quality that you had that made you achieve these results? And what advice would you give your younger self or someone coming into the business?
being boring is important. Um, in the business field that I'm in, reliability and execution is absolutely crucial. The secondary market on the hardware and infrastructure side is full of charlatans and folks that overpromise and underdeliver. And we make sure that on any mandate that we take, we do the exact opposite. We underpromise and we try to overdeliver. And if things go bad, we will fall on a knife to make sure our clients are happy. And that in itself has basically been one of our biggest marketing tools, is that making sure every single time I have a call follow up with a client, key stakeholder, and say, what did we do wrong? And if they're like, nothing, I'm like, great, this is a short phone call. But I'm always looking to improve as to how we do business, and always making sure that we increase transparency in how we do business. On the secondary market in particular, Telegram is a major source of conversation and deal origination. And unfortunately, because of the pseudo-anonymous nature of Telegram, there's a lot of people that have gotten scammed, just because of how easy it is to basically replicate and rip off a profile. We were one of the first folks in the market that we have a secondary verification check that if you're dealing with somebody on Telegram, you can go to our website, authenticate, guarantee that's the person you're actually talking to. So going above and beyond just the average, hey, you want to buy some ASICs, you want to buy some transformers, you want to buy a GPU, we want to make sure that the whole life cycle of a deal is clean and safe and boring.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the
No,
key.
that's
We want to
beautiful.
be boring,
That's
right?
a really good way of putting it. I've seen those verification processes take place with crypto exchanges, because there's been a lot of scams with, listing on crypto exchanges, and people impersonating listing managers on these crypto exchanges. So taking that
Yeah.
concept into, the supply chain of data center business, and all the scams that have been unfolding, that's a perfect feature to have on your Telegram for sure, and on your website. And working with these public companies, uh, it gives you some sort of upper hand in terms of the perspective you have on the market. Where do you see the trend in terms of, or the growth drivers that are driving the trends of, compute infrastructure, whether it's blockchain, AI, and cloud? Where is it going? What are these public corporations, you know, looking to achieve with their expansion plans and scale, and how does that benefit our decentralized world, and also more importantly, the infrastructure of the internet as a whole? I mean, there's a lot
Yeah.
of demand for power, and I see what drove you into going into the power business with Validus, because ultimately every other Bitcoin miner ends up passionate about energy and power, right? When you truly understand Bitcoin mining.
Well, that's a long question to answer. I'll try to unpack each point of the question that you brought up. Number one, decentralization. I would argue, and I have argued with a lot of people recently, that the network is actually more decentralized now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
I think the centralization via pools is a red herring. I think the hash generation distribution is now more decentralized than it's ever been. I'll repeat that. It is more decentralized now than it's ever been. That being said, it may not be decentralized in regions that we all agree with, but that's the point. The Bitcoin network can be secured by hash rate from literally anywhere on the planet, and that's what makes it secure. It doesn't matter if you're in North Korea, in the United States, in Iran, in Venezuela, in Ukraine. It doesn't matter if you're in Canada, United States. What matters is you're securing the network and that the rest of humanity can rely on that network. So that's number one. Decentralization is stronger now than it's ever been. On the contrary to other protocols like Ethereum, Solana, Gripple, I used the wrong word on purpose, etc. Some trends. I think one of the biggest trends in the data center industry, or as you eloquently put at the beginning of the conversation, the compute industry, is increased power densities. And really what that means is the power output of the silicon technology that we're using today is like multitudes more powerful than they were even 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And what that means is for the amount of electrons you're putting into a chip or a circuit, CPU, GPU, FPGA, whatever, the amount of output you're getting is now exponentially greater than it was several years ago. What that means is that a lot more power density is occurring on the chip level. And this isn't just happening in the digital mining side or Bitcoin mining side. That's my bread and butter right now. But this is actually happening on the general compute side for high performance computing or HPC. So like the Amazon Web Services of the world, the Microsofts of the world, the IBMs of the world, CoreWeaves of the world, their applications are becoming a lot more power intensive as well, which means that Bitcoin mining or digital mining has always been relatively power intensive. AI compute is now becoming relatively power intensive and catching up to Bitcoin or digital mining very rapidly. In fact, I would probably estimate that in the next 2 or 3 years, the power densities on a per square foot within a data center will match or be even superseded on the AI general compute side because of the amount of compute density and consumption that's required for today's TikTok filters and Instagram and GPT-4s and GPT-5s. And like everybody and their brother is looking at integrating some sort of generative AI, and the amount of compute power that's required, even for the most basic AI computational workload, is relatively intense. And so that's why SunnySide Digital, my company, we're looking at ourselves as being a dual stream company where digital mining is where we started on the data center side, but we're truly moving to have a growth vector on the HPC side. We're actually looking at acquiring a company on the HPC side. We've hired several folks to really focus on that. We've done several multi-million-dollar deals on the GPU side, and that's really a growth vector for us as we continue to scale the company.
Wow, no, I love it. And based on what I heard, I would argue that the the next uh, um, uh, concern or the next priority for the energy business as a whole is in terms of, or for the compute industry as a whole, is to identify reliable distributed energy infrastructure to continue providing that not just the decentralized power that is required to keep the decentralized network of Bitcoin running and others, but also to have reliable sources of energy that don't get them exposed to geopolitical risks or grid power restraints or other sorts of bureaucratic complexities that deter the people's ability to have different forms of commerce, uh, for that matter, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's what's truly been providing us liberty and some sort of a freedom is the expansiveness of this digital infrastructure, but also the applications that are being run to allow us the people to actually transact without intermediaries, to actually build businesses with a limited amount of capital, to unlock financial inclusion and financial freedom eventually. And I think having distributed energy infrastructure allows that to happen. As long as energy is controlled by centralized institutions, then limitations are inevitable.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's another trend I should mention as well, is that even the disparate stranded energy is now becoming useful through the utilization of data center technology by becoming an off-taker of first resort. So I was chatting with somebody a few weeks ago from some media outlet, and they were asking about Africa. Have you done deals in Africa? And I'm like, actually, we've done a ton of deals in Africa. And it's kind of funny because what most people don't know is there's actually a lot of hydro facilities in Africa and random small remote communities where they don't need hydropower, but it was built because of some World Bank program protocol to develop low cost energy, but then the energy is not really used. So there's communities that are bundling capital together to develop their own data centers, microgrid data centers, to then preserve capital and reduce their own local fiat currency volatility risk by parking capital into Bitcoin, which ironically these days looks like a good idea. And I think generally over time, given the anti-inflationary principle of the Bitcoin network, I think they're actually going to be very well suited for that. And again, it's bringing inclusion into the farthest and most remote communities on the planet into the digital economy of what we're experiencing. Digital economy 3.0 is what I call it.
Yeah,
But more importantly, if you are looking at it from like a society perspective, if you can build power generation, but then you need to build a transmission capacity, you can actually set up a data center to power economically that power generation before the transmission is set, so that you can actually provide and build low cost power for communities around the world using the Bitcoin protocol as an off-taker first resort until the power connection is built to the communities. And then you can shut down the data center, move it to another area, and continue to build low cost renewable power generation sustainably without taxpayers paying for the bill for transmission.
exactly.
It's kind of mind blowing, to be honest.
It is. It is. It's a revolution within itself. You brought up fiat currency devaluation very briefly. I'll ask you. I'll make a point on that, and maybe you can add more color with given your experience, but also the fact that this newfound technology is providing natural wealth to marginalized communities who have a history of colonialism and a history of being dispossessed from their natural resources. And now indigenous people can have all around the world can take ownership of their natural resource and truly build natural wealth using Bitcoin, which is by nature, because of its code and because of its infrastructure, a a store of value that inevitably allows capital appreciation, and hedges against currency devaluation, which is eroding people's purchasing power. But most importantly, in these countries, as you mentioned, their fiat, some of these countries with, maybe uh, uh, mismanaged government institutions, or even worse, tyrannical, um, these currencies around the world have been devalued to a point where most of them are indebted to Western governments, right? And they have to pay back their debt in that foreign currency. So they'll never be able to pay back that debt because their currency is ultimately worthless. So by I guess just my hypothesis, by building this infrastructure and storing Bitcoin, at some point in time you're no longer exposed to that devaluation of your local currency, and you're more likely to pay off that debt. I mean, what's your take on that?
I think you nailed it. I think that's exactly the theme and the thesis that a lot of these folks are having, and it's coming to fruition. I mean, I personally DCA BTC as much as I can as
Yeah,
well, because at the end of the day, I'm in Canada myself, even though my company's global. But the fiscal policy of the current Canadian administration is mind blowing. I mean, it's like spending worse than drunken sailors. I mean, it's like spending like drunken sailors with a gambling addiction. It's insane. I mean, they're spending on the backs of my grandkids, not knowing what they're actually doing today. Like technology can certainly increase standards of living for sure, but you still need fiscal austerity to make sure that what you're doing makes sense. Can you actually pay the bills? I've got a credit card. I pay the bills every month. I don't overspend and then issue more currencies if it's free money because it's not. At the end of the day, us as ratepayers, taxpayers, will have to pay that check. And so I think the Bitcoin network, which is what I've kind of attached my whole life to at this point, is something that really does help pick humanity up away from that inflationary spending that we've been seeing, and really the lack of fiscal understanding by current government administrations globally.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I
there are
know of.
some rare cases that they're like they get it, and you look at Argentina, you look
Yeah,
at
exactly.
El Salvador. El Salvador has its own issues for sure, but at least from a fiscal and economic perspective and a safety perspective, hats off to Bukele, and what they've actually been able to do for that island, because it was not a safe place to go 4 years ago, and now you can actually go and have a great vacation. Economic prosperity is happening. It's not just because of Bitcoin, but it's the mentality of what Bitcoin itself espouses within the people
Exactly.
that are in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of good things happening. A lot of the old existing powers that be are getting concerned, but we've actually made some massive progress in the past few months. I mean, you look at the ETFs, you look at BlackRock, Blackstone, JP Morgan saying one thing from one side of their mouth, doing something completely different on the other.
Yeah.
Jamie's trashing Bitcoin and then quietly making sure he's investing in it. It's like, come on, man. Don't skate where people are saying the puck is going, follow the puck,
Yeah,
right? See where it's
100%.
going and you follow where it's going as well, or try to get in front of it.
Yeah, I strongly believe it's very important that people get it at this point. Just, the average people like myself, that they get it, and that understand that this is something that could potentially hedge your risk against fiat currency devaluation, against inflation, against many um, uh, things that are wrong with our fiscal policies, as you mentioned. And governments all around the world are starting to see that and starting to take back their sovereignty by building compute infrastructure that enables Bitcoin mining and other similar applications. On that note, I do want to touch on finally one last thing is the Bitcoin halving. And, this cycle, or the end of this Bitcoin cycle that we're in, and going into the new cycle post April,
Epoch, yeah.
yeah, it's completely different from previous cycles that I've experienced. I've only been around for two cycles, and it's completely different than the last two cycles that I've experienced because of the nature of the funds and capital and investors that are involved right now in the industry, and the maturity and the regulation and everything around that. What's I'm trying myself to even figure out what's happening post halving now. How should I strategize as a miner in terms of my equipment? If I have old generation machines and I have new generation machines, but I still have reasonable cost power, a lot of miners are now smaller miners. I'm not talking about the publicly listed ones because they have access to massive amounts of capital to upgrade their fleet. But the ones that are working with uh, 2 generations ago miners, like whether it's M20s to M30s to S19s to S20s, right? And how are people going to manage post halving, and what is your take on that? And maybe that'll give our listeners and our viewers some value, and eventually hopefully reach out to you in terms of upgrading and strategizing on their fleet.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We're working on several mandates with um, large operators, data center operators on the digital mining side, and as well as smaller commercial size guys and smaller guys as well. There's a what we call the fleet refresh cycle going on right now, where there's a new generation of hardware hitting the racks, and we're helping existing folks de-rack, clean, diagnose, consolidate, and then sell into secondary market. This happens every single cycle where you've got older generation units coming off of racks and then moving to areas of the world where cost of power is very, very low, if not negligible or free. And so what I would caution though is that there has been huge buying in the market recently, and that there is not much new generation hardware left for the foreseeable future until like Q3, Q4 this year already. So this is something I said at the Swan Bitcoin event in LA last fall, is that when the bull market really hits, ASIC scarcity really hits. Because if you've got a machine that's putting out BTC at a relatively profitable level and BTC is ripping, the last thing any reasonable economic actor wants to do is sell that machine. So
Yeah,
that's really
we've
what's been
seen that
happening.
in 2021 when there was absolutely no supply. Like
That
people
may
were buying
happen yet
anything.
again.
Yeah.
That may happen yet again. We work with most of the major manufacturers, and there's no stock left in Q2 already. The secondary market's starting to increase on pricing. So if I were to give any advice, it's not investment advice, but just strategic advice, is look at the hardware you have. If it's profitable and if you can lock in refresh, lock in a refresh as soon as you can before pricing starts to accelerate. And do not sell your old gen until you have your new units coming in. Because a lot of folks that I've known have been caught off guard where they're like, oh, there's units everywhere. I throw a rock and I hit some. No, that's not going to happen. That's not going to be the reality in the near future.
Yeah.
Do not sell your hardware until your new hardware is landed in your dock and you can literally physically put it onto the shelves. Be very careful with how you refresh. Also, be very careful with promises and pricing that is too good to be true. There have been numerous scams that have affected very credible and serious folks in the ecosystem. Luckily, we haven't been hit, and knock on wood, we do everything we can to not get hit. But there are a lot of nefarious actors, especially with the amount of capital at play. So deal with reputable individuals only. If the price is too good to be true, it probably is. And I would say, measure twice, cut once, measure 3 times, cut once, and make sure you've done the economic analysis, but also the engineering analysis, because some of the new hardware coming out is not cross-compatible to existing electrical infrastructure.
Mm.
Like the T21s, they're a different phase than the traditional S19 series. S21s also require a much higher power density than the traditional S19 series. So if you are upgrading, make sure you've done your electrical engineering homework, because it's not as easy as swapping out generally. The K Pros, actually fantastic unit. We've moved several thousand of, like many, many thousands of those, and they're a great unit. Fantastic pricing relative to like the efficiency ratio, joules per terahash. But I would be moving sooner than later before the market really seizes up. Because we've had huge players come in recently, and we know we're not the only player in the space that has seen this activity. And I could come back to being as scarce as 2021, where hardware was trading at $100 per terahash,
Yeah, that was
which
that
was
was
nuts.
that was nuts. That was overvalued at the time, but there was no
But was
supply,
it?
so
But was
there
it?
was no supply. Demand was there, so it makes sense. But at the same time, didn't make sense.
But you can
It's
even look like November, December, you could have been buying S21 futures in 17, $18 a T,
yeah,
and now S21s are 20, $25 a T in the retail
25. Yeah,
market,
yeah,
right? So that's going to keep going up. And I know that manufacturers, they don't just sit around saying, hey, you guys can keep making money. They like making money too,
of
right?
course.
So be careful because the manufacturers are going to reprice given where the market reality is and the economic returns are. So be very careful.
So supply crunch is coming. People better be
It's
very
already starting to hit.
careful. Yeah, people
Yeah.
be got to be very careful with who they buy from. Hold on to your
Yeah.
old
If you go to a
fleet.
website and there's no face, there's no LinkedIn pages, there's no way to trace who you're actually dealing with, be very careful.
Yeah, never buy
You
an
know,
ASIC
like
online for sure, unless you're speaking to someone directly and you can verify it.
unless it's with like a credible group that you know
Yeah,
that you're dealing with an actual individual, always insist on video calls,
yeah,
especially when you're dealing with banking information. USD Wire is likely one of the best ways to do it because there's at least a traceability of where funds are going.
yeah,
We do transact in digital assets, but we flush directly through our OTC partners so that we transact in USD because we're a computer hardware business. We're not a
yeah,
Bitcoin business per se. We're a data center computer hardware business.
yeah. Well, these are the complexities that come with the industry. Taras, I really appreciate your time. Your insights are really valuable. I love the perspective. I'm always looking forward to speak to you again. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Mo.
for joining us.
Appreciate the time.
Thank you.